All right, so everyone having a great time so far? Yeah. Woo, there's the energy. All right, so these people are happy too, because they got requirements for a brand new project. Have we all been there? I've been there. Super exciting times, right? All right, let me spoil that for you. Sorry. Who's familiar with this? All right, I see a lot of hands. Everyone knows. The cat's not happy either. Who am I? My name is Avindra Fernando. I'm a software consultant based in Kansas City. I help clients architect web applications which are scalable, and I also help them modernize their tech stacks. So I work with a variety of different projects, a variety of different domains, a variety of different technologies. React Server Components has happened to be one of the things that I work on. I also work on helping setting up testing strategies. I migrate existing tech stacks onto more modern tech stacks. So if anyone has any project ideas they would like to discuss with me after this talk, I would be happy to chat. Let's go back and figure out, before we talk about the struggles, where this all started. It all started with rendering, right? So if we go back to our React world, we're familiar with client-side rendering. That's what we do today, right? But what's the negative here? If your client has slower internet, if they have almost no internet, then here's what's going to happen. The moment they load it, they're going to see a blank screen for a while. A few seconds later, they may start seeing your page. Mostly we're devs, so we don't experience that. We got great internet. Unfortunately, our clients don't. So that's where it all started, right? Because we realized that every client has this really powerful thing called a browser, and the browser can run JavaScript, so let's just leverage JavaScript engines to do all of that work. So that's what we did. The real reason why it was a struggle is this. The famous use effect. Or should I say the infamous use effect. Once we were given this tool, what did we do? We just went crazy with it, right? Just started adding it to fetch data, to sync up state on your DOM, a lot of things. Now then the React team figured out, okay, no, slow down. That's probably not okay. So can we offset some of these responsibilities over to the server? Because now we have the power of client machines, we also have power of servers. Why don't we leverage that, right? That was the birth of React Server Components. So the idea is pretty simple. Now think of it as you have this app here, right? And you're going to structure it in multiple ways. What if some of your components were server components and some of them were client? Pretty powerful concept. The last time I said this, someone asked me dude, are you talking about PHP all over again? That's what we used to do. The difference is timing. It's not exactly PHP. Here's why. PHP days, that's the only thing we could do. We did stuff on the server. We barely touched the client machine, right? Because we didn't know it was powerful. We didn't know how well the JavaScript engines can do their job. So we barely use that. Now, we've gone the other way. We use the JavaScript engines on the browsers for everything and everything, right? So let's just bring back some of those responsibility back to the server. So this little girl gets it. Let's have both, right? All right, so we started with React being a library. If someone says anything else, they're probably lying to you. So when the whole industry was demanding frameworks, right? They were we're going to come up with different frameworks to achieve this. So what can we do? So why don't we take React all the way to production? And that's when Next.js comes along then with the tagline and said it's a React framework for the web. Now we're a production-ready framework. So with Next.js, essentially the idea was we're able to support server components. We're able to also do client components. And they highlight this really well, right? So when do you want to use client components versus when do you want to use server components? So here, if you are fetching data in your components, that's an obvious use case for a server component, because a server can handle that really well and construct all of that data, send that constructed HTML back to the client. If you are wanting to still track button clicks, more interactive elements, those can now live on the client, right? So now we're kind of unlearning what we've been doing with React and relearning this new pattern of when do I use what component. So great time to be. So how do we use it, right? So for example, here's an example of a navigation bar component. We have a set of navigation items, and you see this keyword right up top. Now, if you have already messed with server components, you're probably familiar with what that is. What is use client? By default, in the server component world, server components are run on the server. So if you want to make something run on the client, you have to specify to the compiler and say, hey, this should be running on the client. So the industry agreed standard was use client. We use that to denote that this is a client component. Now there's a caution. We're going to have to be careful when we start adding use client all over the place. So just because you add use client, you're probably not going to be able to do something like this. So for example, you have a client component, and then you want to use a server component. You can't simply inject it how you used to do it, right? So importing it would not work this way. So what you would do instead is you have to restructure your client component to accept children, and you can pass in your server component as a child to your client component to solve that. So this is going to work. So now, once you have a property, you can pass in a server component to your client component as a child, right? So that's what we're going to be used to. Let's see what the industry said about all of this, right? So anyone familiar with the survey State of React? You participated in it? All right. So with React 19, a lot of cool things came out, right? So we're going to expect like excitement, positivity, except when the results came out, this is what they said. The devs were frustrated. Like pain point number one, React server components. What do we have here? Suspend, server actions, use action state, use optimistic. All of these are pain points. So people who were excited about these things, now they're listing it as things which are really hard to deal with, right? And that's expected. Because what happened was we were used to writing React a certain way. And now we've kind of fundamentally changed that perspective, right? So we're at this junction of unlearning what we already know and relearning a newer way of writing React, which is, so the pain points are expected. So this is actually good news, in my opinion, that this is what we're seeing with the survey results. So I want to share with everyone a common list of pitfalls that to watch out for, or I would like to put a more positive spin on it, so lessons learned, right? So that when you all get started with server components, you know not to fall into the same traps, or you know what to look out for. So the first one I want to highlight is state management confusion. So for example, let's say you have a component like this, where I want to be able to track. So I'm showing a product grid, and I want to be able to have a button which tracks featured products, discounted products, and things like that, right? So imagine that I have a button that essentially sets a filter, and based on that filter, now I'm going to filter out the product grid. So for example, here, I am trying to fetch the list of products, and I'm also trying to do on-click to set state. So I mentioned earlier, in server component world, everything is by default a server component. If you try to make this a server component, the compiler will complain and say, no, that's not allowed, right? The violation here is, can someone spot it? Use state, right? That is a client side construct. So ideally, you can't just blindly take this code and port it over, right? So we have to unlearn what we know. So constructing React like this is probably not going to work. So now we have to figure out which parts can be offset to the server, which parts can the client do, right? So let's refactor a little bit. So now I have my server component, which is going to track a filter. And what I can do is I can pass state using the URL between the client and the server, which is perfectly valid, right? Which was an age-old trick that we've been using for a long time. So let's leverage that. So use that idea there to pass a state, and then you can fetch the products on the server side, and then you can construct a product filter component which keeps track of what the user is clicking, right? So when they click on feature products, it updates a URL, passes that state over to the server side. So that component will look something similar to this. And this is a client component. So we have to declare use client. We give the directive up top. Now this one, you can keep track of all the button clicks. You can use state. You can use anything that the client is interacting with, client is clicking, right? So, and then once you want to use it, here's where you can track your button clicks and update filter. It'll update the URL. The URL will essentially be read by the server component. It can fetch the products based on that and return the results back. So again, we have to unlearn what we know and relearn this new pattern of how can I deconstruct an existing component and which part goes on the client, which parts goes on the server. Because most of you, I imagine, are working with existing code bases, right? So now you have to think about it in terms of how do we refactor these code bases, right? If you're starting with Greenfield, you know, that's the best place to be, but most of us in reality are not in that boat. All right, so the fetch fiasco. This one's a cool one. What if I have a set of components here which are calling three to four other components? So you have a product header, product details, product reviews. Now, in each component, you know, we encourage to fetch data, right? So what if different teams wrote it, or you're not even that aware of what it's doing? But what if in each component we are fetching the same data? So here's an example of line number 12 is fetching products by ID, right? Product info. And then in line number 17, we're doing the exact same thing. Now, when you run this, in theory, it's going to run multiple times. It's going to be fetching the same data over and over again. Now, whoever's working in Next is probably like, no, that's not true. It doesn't work like that in Next. That's true because Next did optimize all that, right? But if you're working in React Server components outside of Next, there's many other frameworks that are exploring the idea, right? If you choose to go to any of the other frameworks, just be aware that this could potentially be a problem that you may have to handle. So what do? We can, you can use two different approaches. The first one is to deconstruct where you fetch the data, right? So if you have three components, a product header, product details, product reviews, you can essentially fetch the data in the parent component and then pass the data around as a prop to the children components so it can use it whenever it needs it, right? So then only one fetch will happen. Or with React 19, you can essentially use React's cache. With React's cache, you wrap your call in a cache directive, and now you can call it many, many times over and over again, but React's gonna be smart enough to know this has already been invoked, and I'm gonna only fetch it one time, and every other time it's gonna come from the cache. Now in Next, behind the scenes, under the hood, that's what they've done. So this automatically happens in the Next world. We probably are not even aware that's what's happening, but it's good to be aware of this is what's happening under the hood. So in case you do choose a different framework, something to watch out for. All right, client-server waterfalls. We've heard the word, well, what does it really mean, right? Essentially, sequential loading versus parallel loading, right? If you have components that are traditionally being loaded sequentially, how do I essentially make sure that doesn't happen? And how do I make sure that I can load things in parallel, especially if they're unrelated? So if you have a set of components like this, usually what happens in a waterfall scenario is it's going to be completing everything that's been told by user profile, then it's going to go to user post, then it's going to go to user stats. So if they're sort of related, but mostly unrelated, then you're waiting one after the other for everything to complete. What if I can parallelize this, right? So this is where even the dude gets confused about this stuff. Well, not really confused, but I think he's in suspense. And the suspense is a little bit terrible. Well, no, that's a wrong suspense. We're talking about React suspense as a solution for this, right? So bring in the idea of providing a fallback to your users when you are doing this loading type of scenario. So they're not just looking at something which is blocking another component, right? So this way you're providing a great user experience by showing, all right, when my user profile is being loaded, what do I show, right? It could be a skeleton screen, it could be loading icons, whatever you think would be the right user experience for your product. So you can wrap your components in suspense and get it working. Now again, in the next world, some people are probably like, we don't do that. Well, Next does a lot of things for us. So does anyone know how Next handles this by default? Loading.tsx, yeah. You can have a parent level loading.tsx, which should essentially listen to this. But if you want to get granular, you can include suspense boundaries in your components as well. Let's talk about error boundaries. How many of you have had a scenario where there was an error in one component and crashed the entire application? All right, been there myself, right? Something like this. Let's say you are having a product, you're loading reviews which are unrelated to each other, but then there was an error in product and caused reviews to crash. Nothing shows up, right? So I wanted to get creative with this, so I did ask AI to generate me, okay, what is this gonna look like? And not only AI generated this error scenario, but it actually told me what's wrong. It's like, you gotta know better. So the entire page crash could have been prevented had you used a granular error boundary. All right, so that's what we'll do. We'll go add error boundaries to solve it. You can wrap your components in error boundaries. You can define it however you like, right? It could be a component that your UX team has come up with that you can show. In Next, it will be a specific file called error.tsx that you can put your logic in. If you want to get more granular than that, you can also include granular error boundaries as well. So now, what you can do is, in your components, you can freely throw those errors and not worry that it's going to bring the entire application down, right? Because you have boundaries set up, it's only going to go to that level. It will just show that one component with your fallback for the error and say, the review is failed, but every other thing in your application is functional. Okay. What's the largest lesson of this all? Do we all feel like we're standing on the bottom of a mountain and looking at a huge mountain like Everest? Like, this is a lot of stuff coming our way, right? That's normal. I've been there. Everyone has been there. This is what we're going through right now. So again, I asked AI, okay, what do we think? And again, it's pretty snarky. It said, okay, I think it's going to take about 3 to 4 months. Okay, hopefully. We'll see. Maybe I'll say about 6 months, right? Let's do a 6-month learning curve and see where we are after all of this. And the goal is, once we go through that, without quitting, once we go through that valley of despair, are we gonna get that aha moment and say, all right, I finally get this stuff. I'm gonna go make some great applications with React Server components. Yeah, is everyone on board? We'll meet again in 6 months? All right, cool. Well, most importantly, I want everyone to have fun. So that's what we're here for, right? Coding is a lot of work, but we're here because we love coding. We love to have fun, although it's painful. That pain is good, right? I want to leave everyone with a quote that's dear to my heart. Stay hungry, stay foolish by Steve Jobs. Again, my name is Avindra Fernando. I'm a founder and consultant of Temperament Consulting, where I help clients architect various web applications, help them with their testing strategies, do workshops, do one-on-one mentorships. I conduct code reviews for teams. So if anyone has any ideas that you're kind of struggling with in your company, I would love to have a chat and discuss that. This is my webpage. And although they said no questions, to be fair, I entered 5 minutes early. So, because I do want to hear some feedback and questions. If anyone has anything, let's talk. What do we think? Yeah.
So what is the best way to handle cache in your server components? You stored the React cache, right?
Yes.
Are there any other best ways besides that?
Yeah, so the React cache is for the component itself. But if you're referring to data, there is different mechanisms that you can use for data caching, right? So if you're using something like Next, it allows you to essentially, by default, I think it automatically figures out the best scenario, whether you want to cache the data or not. Otherwise, you can say, these pages, I want it cached no matter what, right? It's a privacy policy page or it's a terms and conditions page. Doesn't change at all, right? Let's keep it cached forever, and you can do that. Or if it's highly dynamic data, like banking data or something like that, you need real-time data every second, then you can instruct and say, don't cache this ever, right? So it's all a mix of match approach that you would select as a developer for your team to say, these components always cache, these components never cache, these components in between, right? You can use another mechanism where you can say, keep it cached until an X amount of seconds, and then go refetch the cache again, right? So it's all, freedom is up to us as developers to come up with these ideas. Anything else? We're ready? All right, thank you.